everyone. My name is Jess Slavin. I'm Mass Bike's Communications Director. I'm so excited to have you here with us for our Inclusive Ride Leader training. We have Jacob Sheppard-Saidel with us. Jacob is a passionate advocate for sustainable transportation and outdoor recreation for everyone. They have over a decade of experience facilitating and cultivating community, leading outdoor events, and creating outdoor opportunities for all. You can usually find Jacob on a bicycle, at the swimming hole, or in a tent. You might also find them at one of the many events they host as a leader of All Bodies on Bikes Western Mass chapter, where they're building an inclusive community for all people to move their bodies joyfully. Beyond their outdoor advocacy, Jacob loves to cook, play music, take photos, and play games. And I will give it over to Jacob.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jess. Thanks for that introduction. And thanks to all of you all for being here tonight. And a huge thanks to Mass Bike for putting this on and hosting me this evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I know about how to lead inclusive rides. This is absolutely not comprehensive. I am still learning this. And that's one of the things I want to impart to all of you, that this is not a box to be checked, but always something to keep working at and keep learning. So we're going to talk through some introductions, who I am. We're going to talk about why inclusive rides are important. We're going to talk through the life cycle of an inclusive ride, from preparing that ride all the way through the event and then after the event. And then we're going to go over the key takeaways that I'm hoping that you'll get from the presentation today. So some introductions. All Bodies on Bikes. This is one of the organizations I'm representing here today. The mission of All Bodies on Bikes is to create a body-size inclusive community, to educate and change the bike industry, ensure access to safe and comfortable biking equipment, and celebrate joyful movement on a bicycle for all people. I can say a lot about this organization, but I have a lot of other things to say, so I'm going to keep this brief, and I'm going to share you a little bit about myself. My name is Jacob. I'm on the All Bodies on Bikes National Board, and I also am a leader of the Western Mass chapter. I've organized dozens of inclusive bike rides. In my spare time, I'm a mobility justice and transportation equity advocate. And in my work life, I work at All Out Adventures and the Venture Out Project. These are two very similarly named organizations that are both working to diversify the outdoors through bringing folks in who have disabilities to outdoor activities and creating outdoor opportunities for folks who are trans and queer. So what are the goals that we're working on today? Well, we want to develop an understanding of why inclusion matters. We want to build some skills and knowledge so we can confidently host rides that are welcoming to everyone. And both of these goals are in service of the third, which is to grow our population of bike riders and increase participation in joyful bike rides. So we're going to start with why are inclusive rides important? And I think this is a really key place to start, because without a genuine understanding of this topic, it's going to be hard to engage with any of the rest of this material. Without knowing why we want to make rides inclusive, it's going to be really difficult to work hard to do so. And to me, there's one really key reason. Why are inclusive rides important? Because the more people on bikes, the better. The more growth we have in the number of people riding bikes and the diversity in those individuals, it's going to benefit all of us who like bikes and who like being outside. And there's a couple really key reasons for that. The first has to do with infrastructure, with safety, and with visibility. It has to do with these hard things. The more people riding bikes, the more effort that's going to be taken, the more money that's going to come from our governments, our municipalities, to create effective, safe bike infrastructure for all of us. We all know, as people who ride bikes, that it's a dangerous thing to do, especially on streets. So the more people that are doing this, the more that we're going to see changes, and every little bit really makes a difference when our lives are at stake. The other element here is advocacy. The more people, and it's a numbers game to some extent, the more people who are invested in bicycling infrastructure and advocacy, the more likelihood that there is that some of those people are going to be doing this work in their free time to make sure all of us can ride safely. The other element to this is cultural. It's social, right? More people that are riding bikes, there's going to be a broader bike community. There's going to be a expansion, diversity in bike culture. And one of the things that's really crucial there is it's going to create access and opportunities for especially people who don't see themselves represented in bike culture, to have others that they can engage with, to have a community of people that are similar to them that they can become friends with, that they can feel home within, to grow their love of biking. The last element here is the climate crisis. Every time we can get someone out of a car, it makes a big difference in allowing our planet to be more sustainable and allowing us to live there just a couple years longer. So all of these things are reasons why more people on bikes is better, but what do inclusive rides have to do with that? And ultimately, a group ride can either be an opportunity where someone joins in and feels welcomed into the bike community. It can be a place where they really catch the bug and get invested and they become a lifelong bike rider, or it can be a place where someone is really taking a step back, where it's really deterring them from wanting to ride bikes. And I know that that is kind of dramatic, and that's because it really is. I know folks who have joined rides and caught the bug and absolutely love it and invested a ton of time and effort, and it's the thing that they do now because that initial experience was so valuable. And I know people who went to rides and felt unsafe, felt unwelcomed, felt like this really was not a place where they were allowed to be. And because of that, they hung up their cleats. They put their bike in the closet and they haven't touched it since. This is an example of what we hope an inclusive ride can look like. Lots of folks happy, sharing a nice time on bikes together. But how are we going to get there? So here are some of the key principles that I'm hoping you'll leave today with. Think critically about the needs of your audience. Work collaboratively and always continue learning. And do not leave anyone behind on your ride. So if you don't take anything else from the presentation today, I hope these 3 things will stick with you. Thinking about who your audience is and how you can meet their needs, working with other organizations that are doing this work and working collaboratively, and always working to not, instead of check a box of accessibility or inclusivity, genuinely engage with this topic. And when you're out on the road, make sure every single person who starts with you finishes with you. So we're going to talk through a little bit right now about the life cycle of an inclusive ride. So there's 3 different elements here that I want to touch on: the pre-ride planning and prep, during the ride, what you might need to do, and following up post-ride. So starting with planning and prep. A couple of topics here we're going to talk about is thinking critically about your audience and goals, developing a route, advertising the ride, and preparing ride support. These 4 things should be done before you come to that start of the ride, before the day of that event arrives. So start with thinking critically about your audience. So the first step here is brainstorming, thinking through who the audience is for your ride, what goals you have for your event, and then what barriers to entry stand between that intended audience and all of those people having an extremely fun time at your ride or at your event. So a couple of these potential barriers to entry, it could be a perceived fitness or skill level, not being sure if you'd be able to complete the ride or access the terrain of that event. Being able to access the start or end of the ride, needing to get there, needing to physically have your bike and your body at the beginning and the end of that ride. Scheduling conflicts, you just can't come, you got something else going on that day, right? Or uncertainty about bicycle or equipment adequacy, not being sure if the bike you have or the equipment you have is good enough to attend that ride. This is a short list. There's a whole lot more of these. And really the goal of this initial step is to identify what they are for your specific group. But it's not enough, obviously, just to identify these and then move on. We need to think about solutions to these potential problems, right? So you want to make sure that you're breaking down those barriers that stand in between your intended audience and all of them having a wonderful time on your ride. So what are some potential solutions here? So the solution for a problem of a perceived fitness or skill level, sharing the route and the pace information is going to allow someone to make that decision for themselves, knowing what they're getting into, knowing what the route is and how fast you're going to be going. They can decide for themselves whether or not they think they can show up and have a good time or not. Access to the ride, making sure that there is a public transit line or parking at the start. Both of these are ways people get around. Having that access is going to allow folks to get to that ride. Another option would be starting the ride at the end of a bike path, or making sure that the ride is in an area that you don't have to bike on extremely busy streets to get to. That'll mean that folks that are using their bikes to get around can get there. If you're considering common scheduling issues, that's going to help you avoid scheduling conflicts. Again, thinking about who is your intended audience. So if you're orienting a ride, let's say, towards people who work in the retail industry or people who work at bike shops. If you plan that ride at 2 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, none of those people are going to be able to access your ride, right? So thinking through who is your audience and how to break down these barriers so that they can get to the ride and have a great time. Again, a short list, but this is an idea of what kind of things to be thinking through before starting the process of planning this ride. This is a photo from a lovely ride that we hosted. This was the Great Tree Ride in Northampton. We'll be sharing a little bit more information about this ride throughout the presentation. So once you've got your audience in mind, you've got some of those barriers to entry broken down, the next step is developing a route. So you want to plan this route well in advance of your ride. So that means not planning it the day before, not hiding it until the day before. Plan it before you even start advertising this ride so folks can know what to expect and so you can know what to expect. Here are some principles that I typically go by when I'm planning an inclusive ride. 5 to 10 miles is a good average. When I'm planning my inclusive social rides, I'm not going to go much more than 5. I might go to 6, but I'm going to keep it right there. That's going to keep it as inclusive as possible for as many people as possible. Keeping the ride as flat as possible. I know some of the places we live just aren't that flat, but the flatter the better. Folks in larger bodies, folks in trikes, folks in recumbent bicycles are going to have a much more difficult time accessing rides that are extremely hilly or have extremely steep hills. Keeping a ride all paved. I'm someone who loves riding off-road. I pretty much all of my rides involve some amount of dirt or gravel or mountain bike trails, but that's just not the case for everybody. Keeping your route all paved means that there are fewer skills that are needed to access it, and any equipment, any bicycle, any tricycle can access that ride that's all paved. So that's an important thing to keeping your route as inclusive as possible. When you've got paved roads, you want to stick to safe and quieter roads. There's a couple reasons for this. The first is safety, of course, right? Your quieter roads, there's going to be fewer cars and they're not going as quickly, so there's less chance of any kind of incidents. Now, the other thing there is accessibility and access. So folks that don't have experience riding on busier roads, folks that don't have the confidence to ride on busier roads are going to be deterred from a ride where you have any sections on those busier roads. So it's not just about safety for the group, but it's about telling people and trying to bring them into this ride in a way that they feel they're able to access it. The other element here is I would opt for a quiet road over a multi-use trail. And that's because those multi-use trails have a lot of different users on them and they're pretty small. So you've got a group of really any size, more than 10 people, especially up to the size of some of these larger rides. And you're going to have a lot of trouble with the existing road users or the existing trail users and the people in your group. It's going to cause a lot of stress for both of you. So I typically recommend sticking to streets that are quieter. And the last thing to keep in mind when developing this route is to avoid obstacles that are going to impede a tricycle. So thinking about gates that might be across a road, barriers, anything like that. Thinking through making sure a tricycle would be able to fit through that space to keep it as inclusive as possible. Once you've designed this route, once you've developed it, once you've planned it out, you gotta ride it. It's not enough just to know what it is. You need to go out there, get on your bike, pre-ride that route, and identify what hiccups there might be. And then go ahead, come back home and resolve any of those problems. Once you've got your route designed, developed, finalized, you need to communicate it. So as you start advertising, communicate that route, making sure to highlight the distance and elevation gain. Not everybody can effectively read maps or has that skill. So it's really great to say, this is exactly how long the ride is. This is exactly how much elevation gain there is. And then also you want to highlight potential obstacles. Those might not be easy to see from the map. So saying there's going to be some busy roads right around here. There's, this steep hill that's coming up. This is a section where there's some uneven terrain, anything like that, that you can share knowledge you should have from pre-riding that route. This is an example of how I like to share routes. It's using Ride with GPS. It's a really robust mapping software. It's interactive and it's a really great way that folks can access that route once you have it ready to go. Talking through advertising your ride now. You know who your audience is. You've got your barriers to entry resolved. You've got your ride planned. How are you going to get people to that ride? They will not show up if you don't tell them about it. So how are you advertising it? It's crucial to make a landing and a sign-up page with with information that is clear and organized. And then any key information you want to include on flyers or any resources you're putting out, sharing the information for that ride. So a couple bits of information that I want to share: time, place, and date. That one's clear, right? No one's going to show up if they don't know where to go and when to go there. The distance and the terrain of that ride. So the distance is going to be how long the ride is. The terrain, that's going to be if it's paved, if it's smooth gravel, rocky surfaces, single track with roots. It's also going to be hilly. Is the route flat? What's the elevation look like? And then pace. This is really crucial. You want to share your pace as a number rather than a kind of qualifying description like party pace. And that's because you want to be really clear with all this information. And party pace can mean really different things to different people. Someone who typically averages 15 miles an hour on a ride, 10 miles an hour might be party pace. But for someone who averages 8 miles an hour on a ride, that 10-mile-an-hour party pace is going to be a huge challenge to hit. So saying the ride's going to be between 6 and 8 miles an hour. The ride's going to be 10 to 12 miles an hour average. That's going to let people know all of that information ahead of time and be able to make determinations on whether or not they can attend and have a great time. These are all things that you definitely want on your landing page, and most of these you should be putting on flyers. This next group are things that generally would be too busy to put on flyers, but are really important to share on that landing page. So what equipment do you need? Do you need to wear a helmet on this ride? If it's going to go off-road, what size tires do you need? What kind of skills might you need? Do you need off-road riding skills? Do you need to be able to ride in a pace line? Do you need to be able to ride on busy streets? And then accessibility for the ride. I'm going to talk a little bit about accessibility in just a moment. The last thing here, as I said, as many details as possible are great. We want to give people all of the information so they can make an informed decision about whether or not they can come to the ride and have a good time. The last element here to share is to drop any judgment-based descriptions like beginner when you mean slow. These are things we see conflated a lot, where a ride is called a beginner ride when really it's open to people of all different skill levels and it's oriented towards people of all different skill levels. It just is at a slower pace. So these are two different things, right? There's the skills needed. That's what would be a beginner ride, right? You don't need very many skills. All you need to know how to do is ride your bike. That's a beginner ride. And then there's the pace. The pace is about 6 miles an hour, 6 to 8 miles an hour average. That's a slow ride. These are two different things. So it's important not to conflate these two descriptions and be really clear and concise with the information you're sharing. Let's talk through a little bit about accessibility considerations when you're advertising this ride. So these are a couple of them. This is definitely not a comprehensive list, but you want to share information about bathrooms along the route, breaks that you might be taking, how folks with recumbent bikes or tricycles would be able to access the route, things like those barriers across the road or anything like that. Steep hills or uneven surfaces, that's going to impact accessibility. If there is shaded sections or really sunny sections on the ride. COVID accessibility can be an element here, right? We're all going to go into a business together that does not require masks, or we are asking folks to wear masks on this ride. That's another element of accessibility. Again, none of this is full. There's a lot of other things that you can be considering. And this, again, as with all of the elements of advertising and preparing this ride, is an opportunity to think back to your goals, to think back to your intended audience, and think about what accessibility concerns that they might have and how you can address them. This is a somewhat blurry example of a ride sign-up page here on the left, the landing page, and then a flyer on the right for the same ride. So you can get a sense of some of the different information. And I'm going to walk through this quickly. Here on the sign-up page, we've got some of the big information: where we're meeting, what time, what day, why we're doing this ride. We're stopping to look at the coolest trees. And then more information about the meetup location with links so that people can access where that is on a map, along with there's free parking there. It's right on the bike path, information about how people can get there. Schedule information is really helpful, so they know more than just show up at 11, but when they can expect to be back and when they can expect the ride is leaving. The route information with a link to see the route, as well as more information, how long the ride is, hills, busier sections, what the streets look like, what the average pace is going to be. Accessibility information, again, there's some information there about accessibility. Kids, right? Who's invited to this ride? What skills are required to join this ride? And then which wheels to bring? What equipment do you need to join this ride? You can see on the flyer, there is a lot less of this information, right? The crucial stuff is there, the date, the time, the location, and then a little bit about what that ride is. And then a link to access. So that link takes folks right to this page. So they can access all that information. It's really valuable to use a link that's shortened with like tiny URL or bit.ly, so that you're not asking folks to put in a long string of numbers and letters. Using something that's easy to remember is going to make that more accessible. Last element here about advertising your ride is thinking about where your audience is accessing their information and advertising there. So if you're orienting your ride towards beginners, advertising it exclusively on a forum for experienced road racers is not going to reach your intended audience, right? If you are trying to advertise to a specific affinity group or anything like that, you can collaborate or engage with other inclusive organizations to try to get the word out for your event. The last thing that you're going to want to do before your ride is prepare support. So what that's going to look like is a few different roles. You're going to need a ride leader. This is the person that's going to be the first in line. They're going to set the pace. They're going to keep the group together. They need to be accountable to holding that pace that you advertise the ride at. And this ride leader is also going to be making decisions. So they need to be a confident bicyclist. They need to be a confident decision maker. They might be deciding where to position the group in the road. They might be deciding when to go forward from a stoplight or a stop sign. They might be deciding how to deal with incidents that happen. You're also going to need a sweeper. This is the person that's going to be the last in line. It's important that this person has some first aid and mechanical skills, as well as first aid kit and tools. This person needs to have good vibes and needs to be kind. They're going to be the last person. So they might be dealing with someone that's not having a great time. They might be dealing with someone that has some mechanical issue or has an injury or is just feeling bad, is going slowly. So they need to be supportive, they need to be encouraging, and they need to be gentle. The last role are going to be corkers or floaters. So these are people that are going to be in the middle of the group, helping to facilitate anything that's going on there. It's great for these folks to have first aid, mechanical skills, and first aid kits or toolkits. It's really important that they have good vibes, and it's really important that they have facilitation skills. They're going to be helping out to deal with any conflicts that might arise. They're going to be helping out to deal with any, making sure that people are having a good time and facilitating their experience on the ride. They might need to block cars at intersections. That's the corker element of this. And basically what that is putting your body in between a car or in an intersection and the ride so that the ride can stay together. It's crucial that everyone on the ride stays together and cars don't get between different rides and split it up. So the corker is a really key role. As for all of these roles, there is no such thing as too many volunteers to show up on a ride. I typically recommend about one volunteer for every ride participant, but you could definitely well surpass that and have a great time. You can always have a couple of ride leaders. You can always have a bunch of sweepers, and that's really necessary and recommended. You can always have a bunch of corkers or floaters. But all these three roles are crucial. This is an image from the Pride Ride that we hosted in June. And this is one of our corkers who's stopping cars there to make sure that the ride can stick together. We had 90 people on that ride, so it was really important that we kept everyone together. The last element of preparing ride support is bringing materials with you. So here's a couple of things you want to bring. You want tools. That includes a bike pump. That includes bike-specific tools. You want to have a first aid kit, or ideally multiple. You need to have charged cell phones that are already have the numbers of the other ride leaders in them, so you can contact each other. We've also used walkie-talkies. Those can also be effective, and cell phones are great. And then the last thing you want is a route map and knowledge of the route and knowledge of the local area. Don't show up to the beginning of the ride alone and empty-handed. Bring all of these things with you. So we talked through a little bit about how to prepare for your ride. You've done a lot of work. You're ready to go. It's the day of the event. What do you need to do? So there's a couple things here. You want to start with place setting. You want to start with building this container for people to have a great time within. You want to be consistent to the things you said before the ride, and you want to make sure everyone sticks together. And you want to support all the people that show up on your ride with kindness. So place setting, what do we mean by that? So really what place setting is creating a space, creating this container where people feel safe, they feel welcome, they feel held, they feel like they can be their true, genuine selves, and they feel like they are invited to be their true, genuine selves. So a couple of ways of doing that. Start by introductions and community norms. Don't just show up and expect that everyone's going to know each other and start chatting. Welcome them, make them feel included, say hi to people, bring the group together and introduce yourself and the other ride leaders and share the community norms. Those are really crucial so people know what the expectations are of the space you're holding together. So we're all grounded and we know what we're going to be going through and what needs to be done. The next thing is going to be sharing key route information. Not everyone remembers all the things you said on that sign up page. Not everyone read all the things you said on that sign up page. So share that information, like how long the ride is going to be, where you might stop, any of those challenging sections, stuff like that is what you want to share when you're in front of the group together. Make sure everyone knows who the ride leaders, sweepers, and floaters are and it can identify them. And then lastly, go over an ABC quick check. So that's an equipment check, air, brakes, chain, and quick release. You want to go over that with the group. Not everyone has the privilege of getting their bike tuned up every year. Not everyone has the privilege of being a knowledgeable bike mechanic. So there are folks that might have bike issues. If anything arises, go help them out and fix it without judgment. No one needs to feel like they're in the wrong for bringing a bike that has a flat tire or who needs the brake adjusted. Go ahead and help them feel welcomed and help them feel included in that ride. This is an example of the pre-ride talk we did for the Great Tree Ride. That's me in the center there, chatting with everyone, sharing our community norms. Next things you want to do during the ride, be consistent and stick together. You told people what to expect on the ride. Make sure that everything that happens on the ride is consistent with the expectations you gave them. If you told them a certain pace, stick to that pace. It really sucks to show up for a ride expecting it's going to be an average pace of 7 miles an hour and it turns out to be 12, right? You made a decision based on the information you were given that told you you'd be allowed, you'd be able to access that ride, and then it turned out that the pace was different than you were expecting. That's going to make you feel really bad, right? So stick to the pace that you advertised at the beginning of the ride. Don't make any last minute major route changes. Sometimes some route changes are unavoidable, right? Sometimes there's a road closure, there's something going on, there's construction, and it's actually safer to make a slight change. I'm talking here about major changes. So that would be anything that adds more than a mile onto the route, anything where you're going, changing the terrain that is anticipated. So going on dirt when initially it was all pavement, or going up a really steep or really long hill. If you need to make any changes like that, communicate as early and as clearly as possible, and make sure to really clearly communicate that in your pre-ride talk. Of course, don't leave anyone behind. Everyone that started the ride with you needs to finish with you. Take breaks. Breaks are wonderful. You want to stop and regroup at the top of the hills. You want to give people an opportunity to catch their breath, to drink some water, to eat snacks. Even if for you, the 5-mile ride seems really short, for someone else that might be a challenge, and you want to make sure that everyone is staying fed, hydrated, and rested. An important element of breaks is giving the last person in the group a chance to recover before starting up the ride again. So sometimes that first person in the group might have already been waiting for 5 minutes before the last person gets there and might already, start riding off immediately. It's really important you give that last person the same chance to recover, to catch their breath, to eat some snacks before starting up again. This is an example of a lovely break we took on the Great Tree Ride. This is where folks had an opportunity to put their bikes aside, go walk around the garden, engage with each other, build community, talk off of their bikes, which is a really valuable thing. And also, of course, eat some snacks, drink some water, catch their breath. So that's really lovely. The last element that's important during the ride is supporting all your participants with kindness. Bring enthusiasm, bring cheer, bring support for everyone at that ride. The sweeper at the back of the pack should be having a blast, and it should be really fun to be at the back of the pack with them. It's really important that while you're on that ride, you're focusing and you're centering on bike joy. You're centering on this moment. You're appreciating what each person has brought with them that day, rather than thinking about how they can improve, rather than thinking on what their bike, how their bike could be better or the ability could be better. Think about what this moment is in this experience, rather than trying to think about what your next step is as a bike rider. So you planned a great ride, you executed a great ride. What do you do next, right? So our last step here is to continue learning and improving. And one of the most crucial things you can do here is getting feedback and opinions from your ride participants. You have a really limited perspective as the ride leader, and it's really different than what the perspective is of the folks that came to that ride. So give them a survey, ideally a short survey that they will want to take and that's easy for them to take. And then engage with that feedback genuinely. Take the feedback seriously and work to improve on any of the things they suggest, and work to maintain the feedback they gave you of the things you're doing well. Lastly, of course, commit to always working hard to keep your rides as inclusive as possible. Again, this isn't a box you can check, but ongoing work that you're always going to be engaging with as long as you care about making inclusive rides. The last thing I'm going to touch on here are our key principles. So these are the things I went over at the very beginning, right? Think critically about the needs of your audience. Work collaboratively and always continue learning. And don't leave anyone behind. Now I've got 3 more things I'm going to share with you. Plan your ride with intentionality, right? Think about all those critical things and actually put them into action as you're planning your ride. And then communicate as clearly as possible all that essential information in your advertisements for that ride. And when you show up with knowledgeable and non-judgmental ride support volunteers. And if you do all of that, hopefully you're going to have a really inclusive, joyful bike ride. Thank you.